Hey, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Open Forum podcast. Today, we have with us Dino Nocivelli. He's a partner in the abuse department of the leigh law firm and actively works towards law reforms as it pertains around sexual abuse and has appeared on various media publications, as well as the independent inquiry into child sexual abuse and providing expert opinion and testimony. Look, Dino, that's 20 seconds as to who you are. Why don't you take a couple of minutes, tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got to where you are today, and then we're just going to dive on the topic of conversation of child abuse and sexual exploitation. Sorry.
That's all right. That's great. Thank you. And thank you for having me. So yeah, my name is Dino Nocivelli. I'm a solicitor and partner at leigh Solicitors, specialised in representing abuse survivors in different areas of society. So whether it's abuse in schools or sports, Scout Association, family members, wherever there's an adult in a position of trust and they abuse that position, and I will act on behalf of the survivors against those individuals and or institutions. Been doing this for a number of years, and I work with a number of different charities. And one of my key things is to try to raise awareness, not only of abuse, but actually also the options available to abuse survivors, whether that's bringing legal action, whether it's looking towards inquiries, but trying to result in change. It's really important that we try to encourage people to disclose as soon as possible as the abuse happened. And there's numerous reasons for that, so they can get the help and support they need to try to move forward. But we also want to try to obviously remove the loopholes, but the fact that the abusers can continue to abuse to the current day. So if we can try to prevent abuse, fantastic. That must be our key aim. But if we can't, we need to make sure we can stop as much of it as we can, provide abuse survivors with the support needed, and hopefully to break the cycle of harm. So that's the reason why, as you said, we do lots of cases for individuals. We do media, do inquiries, we campaign and try to change the law, because if this continues for another generation, it'd be an absolute failure on my behalf. There's so much evil in this world. If we can deal with this one, which is child abuse, child sexual abuse and exploitation, we should be doing it. It's 2023. We must do a lot better for this generation than the ones in the past.
Absolutely. I can't echo your sentiments more of we need to do better. And this is a problem that we need to resolve yesterday. As listeners know, I had Craig Sawyer on the previous episode with regards to child trafficking and the work that he's doing there. And again, this is something that leads into that as children can be groomed into that process. Look, I think an important thing to kind of underline here and put it in bold italics is that on average, is it something like 28 or 29 years from point of abuse to someone coming forward about their situation? Can you maybe talk to us a little bit about why that is? And again, you mentioned one of the important things that you guys are trying to do is get people to come forward earlier. So can you maybe talk to us a little bit about why it is that it takes so long and what it is that we can do to make people feel safer in coming forward about these things?
Yeah. So often, people ask me questions, and often they're very simple questions, but with difficult answers. So just building up from some of the things you said, the average age of disclosure, 28, 29 years, we know it takes men longer than women to disclose on average. Lots of the data is obviously not particularly good, because if you have 10 people who suffer abuse, how many of them actually disclose in their entire lifetime? And then the variation, and even that word disclosure, what does that mean? Does that mean me telling you I suffered abuse as a child, or I suffered abuse as a child by my teacher? I suffered childhood sexual abuse by my teacher, or here are the details of the abuse I suffered. And what's the next steps? Do I just want you to know? Do I want you to provide me with therapy, support as my medical professional? Do I want the police to take action? There's very different stages and extent of disclosure, and how I may disclose to my mum is very different to what I would tell one of my mates or my partner or a school teacher. So I think on average, it takes about 30 years. If you suffer abuse when you're 10, on average, you come forward when you're 40. And there's numerous reasons for that, which is one of your first questions. Now, the reason why people don't disclose abuse is often elements of shame and embarrassment, fear of not being believed, because this wasn't just some random stranger. Often, and in most cases, it's someone you know and you trust and is respected by the community. There's a phrase, it takes a village to raise a child, or it takes a village to abuse a child. And if someone's in a position of trust, power, and authority, such as a teacher or your father, then who would believe you against an adult? Why would they believe you? And that often can be a barrier. And especially when you think about when abuse happens, most abuse happens in those key developmental years, which is 10 to 15. In those 5 years, your life will change more, and you will change more as a person than at any other time of your life. If you're 40 to 45, what happens? Nothing really. You don't enter puberty. You don't choose your career path. You don't choose your friends. You don't define who you are as a person. You don't have your first sexual relationship. You're 40 to 45 or 20 to 25. It doesn't matter. Those ages are 10 to 15. And if they are defined by your first sexual experience being with your abuser, if your grades are affected because you can't focus on your studies, if your relationship with alcohol and drugs and self-harm are influenced because of the abuse, they can be life-defining. You fail your GCSEs. You don't go to university. You're not a graduate. Your career paths are very, very different. And your parents often won't understand why you were acting out. So you were fine, and so you just fell off. It's just puberty. It wasn't. It's because I suffered abuse. I'm dealing with the repercussions. So answering your question, these barriers often prevent people from disclosing. And like I said, part of the disclosure is also to medical professionals. You haven't been treated for 30 years. If you broke your leg today, I would hope you see a doctor today and say, look, I had a car accident, I broke my leg. Or I played football and Dino broke my leg playing football. And I'm going to see a doctor. I hope you don't wait 30 years and don't get treatment, because I promise you your leg will get worse and your other leg will get worse and your back will get worse because you're compensating. You may not play football any longer. You may not do social things. So eventually your life is changing because you can't tell someone. And that's the problem. By the time someone does disclose then when they're 40 on average, the impact is often so severe. Trying to untangle everything is really difficult, not just for them, for others. So that's one reason why people don't disclose for so long. We are trying to encourage people to do so, because if you tell me when you're 15 or when you're 40, we can try to help to get your studies back on track. We can try to help to give you the support needed so you don't have to self-medicate, whether it's drink, drugs, gambling, self-harm, to give you the coping mechanisms and to ensure that the abuse stops and the abuser doesn't abuse other children in other schools or elsewhere. That's the reason why it's so important we are able to encourage people to disclose, but importantly, we also listen to them and we act. It's not just on abuse survivors. We all need to listen, believe that individual, listen to what they say, investigate it properly, and to act to stop abuse. Instead, it's so much pressure put on the individual. It's no wonder, even in 2023, I've got clients who are still struggling to talk. So it's a long-winded answer, which I apologize, to a very simple question, but that's why it's just so complex to untangle all those different attributes and issues. But that's the reason why it takes so long for abuse survivors to disclose.
It's so multi-layered, and there's so much of that rang true. So one of the things that I mentioned to you, I think in our DMs on Twitter, is I work as a physical therapist, and I've had many patients say this to myself and talk to me about their sexual abuse and the things that's happened to them. And so much of that, unfortunately, rings true, that it was a father or someone in a position of authority over them. At that point in time, they were acting out as a result of that. And when they went and spoke to their parents later on down the line about it, or their older siblings, one of them in particular said, the response was, that makes a lot of sense now why you were behaving in that way back when. It's also heart-wrenching when you hear that, in as much as it takes a village to raise a child, it takes a village to abuse a child, because there have to be so many people there who are turning a blind eye to the things going on around them or surrounding that child, that person being abused, and allowing it to happen, whether it's willful blindness or what have you. It doesn't make it any more acceptable. The analogy that you gave of the broken leg, there's so much that happens as that cascading effect. it's almost unfathomable to think. And you mentioned there's other things that can happen, not just acting out, but drink and drugs. And that's also something that a lot of abuse victims suffer with further down the line. They're not finding answers, but they're finding comfort in drugs or in alcohol or what have you. How is it that this pathway happens? What can we do to help bring people back?
I think one of the key things is trying to remove the taboo about sex and sexual abuse. I think is really important, and there's different layers, like you mentioned. The fact is, if you're we have issues with class. So a working class child has certain barriers to disclosure, same as a middle upper class child. Male have certain barriers which are different to females, but they are all barriers. And I think the one thing which we really do need to do, and I say this about everything, we need to appreciate the differences. Someone from an ultra orthodox kind of religion, whether it's Catholics, Muslims, Sikhs, or whatever else, they have certain barriers, which means actually you're no longer pure. The Mormon religion have this. So how do you tell your parent, by the way, someone did this to me? Because you shouldn't be doing that. You're not married. It's a total taboo. It's an additional barrier for them. There is for others. And I think what's really important is that we appreciate their children and we do listen and we take away judgment. But it is so hard and it's still a problem. And I think that lots of people, including journalists, and I pick up on it, whether it's the BBC article or elsewhere, they still use the word historic child abuse. And the fact is, similar to the example of a broken leg, you broke your leg 30 years ago. Is it an historic injury? You got murdered 30 years ago. Is it an historic murder? Well, no, it's a murder. Everything is historical. In 10 minutes, our chat will be historical because it's 10 minutes ago. But for some reason, and it's a point of personal safety, it's back in the day. It's the old time. It's historical. Child abuse doesn't happen now, mate. It's absolutely fine.
No,
It's the only crime. If you think of any other crime, historical fraud, historical forgery, historical theft, historical burglary. Nope. It's the only crime we do it. And why? And it is self-preservation because it makes us feel safer. And there's other areas of society we do this, and sometimes so that's one reason. There's also issues in relation to victim blaming and the like, which we see with sexual offences. Why did you not come forward earlier?
Why were you wearing that? You were provoking them.
Exactly.
Maybe you were giving them the eye. Oh, were you drinking?
Yeah.
That's a solid one. You hear that often.
Yeah. And that happens. But also with child abuse survivors, why did you keep on going back for? You weren't abused once, you abused over 2 years. Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you fight him off? You're a bloke. We've seen this often, and this victim blaming can create real issues. And the barriers there are extensive. And when we say about a village, it's not just sometimes just not listening or acting. Often people are worried about the repercussions. And in this country, we still don't have something called mandatory reporting, which basically means there's a legal duty. If you're in a position of authority in a regulatory activity, there's no legal duty to report on it. So, for example, in England, if you're a teacher, you're not under a legal duty to report known child sexual abuse. And if you fail to do so, there's no criminal repercussion. Now, if you're in most states in America, Australia, France, for example, you would be, because in essence, you're helping to cover up a crime. And I think that we've relied on people's morals for far too long. It doesn't work, to be frank, as we can see. We do need to say, look, if you're aware of child abuse, you're under a legal duty. If you're not, you're going to face the repercussions. It helps the child, it helps society, but it also helps the whistleblower, the hero, for reporting on it, because they are worried. If I report on you, how do I know what's going to affect me and my children, my own mortgage? So we need to bring these things into place. I think by doing this, removing the taboo of child abuse and sex and sexual abuse, but also giving people the fact is that a village should raise a child. It's all of our responsibilities to ask why. You were great, Sonny, until you were 10 and you just went off the radar. What happened? We're now going to ostracize you because your siblings, your brother and sister are amazing, but you're a bloody nightmare. And now you're addicted to drink and drugs. Like, what's wrong with you? Your siblings have gone to university, got proper jobs. What are you doing? You can see how by the time you get to 40 on average disclose, it's too late. And even though people go, well, that does make sense, like a Scooby-Doo movie, it's someone's life. And I think we should be questioning why. what has changed? Why has it changed? What's been going on? Asking why, removing the taboo, giving people the tools and weapons to say it's everyone's responsibility is what we need to do. Otherwise, it will just continue and continue and continue.
Because one of the other things that goes on to that of it just continuing is sexual abusers don't tend to just have one victim. They don't. It's not a one-off. No. Despite how they try to duct tape shut the mouth of the victim and prevent them from speaking, whether it's a case of your parents won't, they don't need to know, or your parents don't need to find out, or imagine what daddy would say if you tell them, kind of thing. It's not just the one child.
No, it's not.
On average, over an abuser's span, shall we say, before they're caught, there's some crazy numbers about how many kids they can go on to abuse, right? If they're a teacher in a school, or if they're a church or an imam or what have you. What are some of the figures around that, just so that people have a little bit more perspective of how wide this problem is?
The figures are hazy because the reason why, so for example, as a teacher, and you've been in 10 different schools, you're right in that they don't just abuse one child. All the research shows that. Football coaches, school teachers, priests, imams, they don't. And not only do they abuse more than one child, but they also become more brazen, and the assaults increase. So if the first assault is indecent assault, improper touching, by the time you fast forward to the 4th school, 5th school, or the 10th or 11th survivor, the abuse is escalating in relation to the severity of the actual act, the frequency, the duration per person, because they're getting more confident, they're getting more brazen. And that's why we can stop it in school 1. With survivor 1, it's much better rather than doing it for survivor 50 in school 10. And there is an issue. And lots of schools will just say, look, we don't want the bad PR. Or historically, that's what happened. We've seen a number of schools just saying, look, you need to leave. We're not going to report you to the police, but you need to go. That does happen far too often.
There's been a couple of teachers from schools that I've gone to that have suddenly left. Midway through the school.
Yeah, exactly. And you're like, no leaving party, good old, Mr. Smith, been here 20 years, not even the bloody gold watch, off you go in the middle of the night sometimes. And the question is why, and some of the nicknames as well for these teachers just indicate something sexual or something about sexuality. And your question is, why is that there for? So I think that there is issues in the numbers. And it's extensive. The research is hazy because what you do see then is the media will report on abuse in a certain school for a teacher. Certain people will come forward. But we do find that unless it's naming that actual school, they don't come forward for other schools. So if they've been at 4 schools but only been convicted for 1 school, it will take time for people to say, actually, me too. I was abused in the 2nd school and the 3rd school. And we have seen this over 6-8 years with the same teacher facing different criminal trials. And you can see the abuse escalating. The numbers are so high, and they also become more public. And the number of children per abuser, especially if you're a teacher and the like, it is scary how high they can be, and it varies. But in this country, in England, there's a significant issue. And again, if we can break the cycle, we can stop the abuse, great. But somehow they're able to get job references, they're able to go through, and the like, and remain in circulation for far too long.
How is that a thing? Because obviously they're being removed from the school for this particular reason. So how is it that they're just being passed around from school to school to school, and no one has highlighted it, or no one has come forward? There's been no one, like you said, morals aren't doing enough. How is it that these teachers, that their sole responsibility is the safety and the wellness of the children that are coming through their doors? If I have a patient in my room, their wellness, their safety is my number one priority, on their journey. How are these teachers not doing that?
So as teachers, as religions, whereby you see priests and others being moved around. So unfortunately, it's not just school, it's not just religion, it's not just sport. So they are moved around, or they're let go. And I think that's the phrase. often they're not dismissed, often they're not reported, they're just let go because lifestyle, health issues. But then they go off and get a job somewhere else, and they obviously still get a reference. So I think seeing as these things, people don't want to open the box, people don't really want to know the brutal truth that Mr. Smith or Father John has done these horrendous acts. You need to go. People are feeling uncertain about you. You need to go. And the person goes, okay, I'll go. Because they know the alternative is they're going to fight this and they will all be exposed and it'll be horrendous. So they will go somewhere else, but they can't stop abusing children. Again, forcing people to step up and say, no, you need to properly investigate is so crucial. The only other example in human history, with total respect, is actually Nazi Germany, whereby a lot of good people allowed horrendous things to happen. And if you ever read into the kind of the good German as such, how did you not realize when you were getting promotions and the like and pay rises that your Jewish neighbor was no longer there anymore, and your black grocer suddenly disappeared randomly, and the disabled person was no longer in the library? Did you not ask why that was happening? Do you not question it? And obviously there was repercussions if you did question that regime, your life. I'm not saying in England in 2023 that anyone's going to be shot or killed or murdered for voicing allegations or concerns about abuse. So the question is, seriously, in this country, why do not people not feel able to break that cycle? If in doubt, talk about it, raise it. And what I mean by that, not the survivor, but those other people in positions of trust. If you can see someone's in concern, you see something's not right, or you are made aware of allegations, you should be under a legal duty to report that to the police and for it to be acted on. You should be. We had this recommendation from IICSA. You mentioned that independent inquiry, which was what, last October, 12 months ago. The government's response was, I think we should do a consultation. It was 186 million, wherever else, spent on this inquiry. It's frustrating. There's a consultation. Like, why do you need that? And again, it's just so difficult. And again, is it because we're going to have too many allegations? It's going to be too big. We just won't be able to handle it. So let's keep our head in the sand. And I don't want to be flippant about it, but it just seems so bizarre. You get a recommendation from this inquiry, 12 months on, nearly to the date, still not in place, not even close to it.
I appreciate, given your position and what you do, there's only so much that you can say. Part of me thinks that the reason that the government and the forces are so slow at dragging their feet with it is we also know there's quite a lot of it happening at the higher levels of society, if we put it like that. If we look at, let's say, the Jimmy Savile case, if we look at Jeffrey Epstein, look at where these people were connected to, Ghislaine Maxwell. We're talking people who were connected to the British royal family. We're talking people who were connected to politicians, to prime ministers, and these people. Now, there's two ways to look at this. Either these people, Jimmy Savile, who was brazen on TV, as you mentioned, as the years go by, they get more and more brazen. His interview of Russell Brand, where he's talking about, you get that girl to come over here and she's going to be naked to massage me, and then Russell, we can talk.
That to be true. It'd be very nice to meet you one day, Mr. Jimmy Savile, just, you know.
If you've got a sister, you could meet me by bringing her along.
I mean, I haven't got any sisters, but...
I don't usually meet fellas, but if you've got a sister, that's okay.
I've got a personal assistant called Marsha, and part of her job description is that anyone I demand she greets, meets, massages, she has to do it. She's very attractive, Jimmy.
Well, that's a good start.
What kind of
start? You could send her along to do some research.
Would you like her to wear anything in particular, Sir Jimmy?
I'd actually prefer her to wear nothing.
Right. So you want Marsha, my assistant, to meet you naked? Okay. Well, that's not going to be a problem.
Nothing wrong with that.
Nothing wrong with that, Jimmy. It's just
the last time I spoke like this was to Father Christmas.
Oh yeah, I never trusted those Father Christmases in Debenhams or other stores. They're available. Oh, I said stores instead of shops. I've been in America too long. I don't trust the Father Christmases you get these days, Jimmy. I think you. Perhaps you should be. I think you're. I've always thought of you as a sort of a Father Christmas figure. You know, solving problems.
I couldn't stand the drop in wages.
Jimmy, it's been divine of you to talk to me in this restaurant. Thank you very much. I wonder, would you pass on my best wishes to your beautiful dinner companion, and perhaps you'd consider coming on the show again in the future?
Who knows? I'm always available, and my beautiful dinner companion will have to remain secret because she is of outstanding beauty.
Ooh.
And as such, if you saw her, you would lust after her.
Particularly if I saw her with you, because that just heightens the sexuality of the situation. Thinking
No, I'm not into threesomes.
But Jimmy, there was a time when you were the defining voice of the BBC, and perhaps...
I still am.
You are now, you are tonight, but you should be, as well as passing down information, you should be passing along other things, people could argue.
I've never passed anything in my life, I only take.
You did Jim will fix it for how many years?
Jim will fix it 20 years, Top of the Pops 20 years.
You also used to be a wrestler, is that right?
Still am.
Still am.
I'm feared in every girls' school in Britain.
You used to be a wrestler, didn't you? Is that right?
I still am.
Oh, yeah.
I'm feared in every girls' school in this country.
The things that he said on interviews of, wait till I'm alone with that kid, blah, blah, blah. Some real horrible things. You're telling me that Jimmy and Jeffrey were so smart that they managed to trick MI5, MI6, the CIA, Secret Service, all of those people, and get so close to the most protected people on the individual lands, the individual nations. Now, for me, that doth butter no parsnips. Either there is, again, that blissful ignorance of wanting it to, or not wanting to acknowledge it, or there is some element of wanting it to continue, because we know that they trafficked children to somebody. We know that abuse had gone on. There was a British Prime Minister who there are allegations of abuse for. I think it was Edward Heath, many, many years back. We know that the German government, this was something that was, this was 2010, it came out that for 30 years, the German government was actively putting foster children with known pedophiles and sexual abusers. So there's active government involvement in different countries around the world. That, for me, is definitely something where I think there's more that meets the eye. There's a reason that things are being dragged so long. And again, I appreciate your position. Maybe you can't elaborate too much on that, but at least there must be something there when we look at the high-profile cases that we have. Who's that presenter with Holly Willoughby, the fella that was
Philip
dating?
Schofield.
That's it, Philip Schofield. You've had other BBC presenters, BBC producers, the highest levels of TV, of media, politics, at every stage. There's something there.
So I'll answer your question. And before we did this interview, you said, was anything off
Off-topic, off
topic.
limits.
And I said, yeah, and I said no, because I don't think that's fair, and I think that, should always answer direct questions, and we should have no off-topic, off-limit conversations or points. So answer your question directly, I think when you look at it on a basic level, most abusers are men, 99%, and that's not a made-up figure, 99, probably higher than that, are men. All the people you just mentioned had power, trust, and authority. Now, they may not be a teacher, they may not be a rabbi, they may not be a football coach, but they were TV stars. They were people who either had financial power or societal pressure, or societal power even. And that includes MPs. And I think that there's lots of allegations of sexual abuse within Westminster, of MPs with staff and other things like that. And that's because, again, you've got a man who's in a position of power, and he's got someone who's a subordinate, someone who's not a child, but a younger member of staff. They're open to abuse, and they do then abuse. I think on a basic level, that's what's in play. I think in relation to them dragging their feet, I think it is the fear, a bit like I mentioned about the schools and others who don't want to expose this issue. Do you want to be the person who opens this horrendous box to show how extensive abuse is in your country, with a crumbling criminal justice system, a prison service which is at capacity, as announced this week, NHS which can't cater for the number of people which need support, reduced police forces and the like? This is not a political point at all, but the fact is, do we have the capacity to prosecute the number of abusers and to provide the support needed for the number of survivors? Yes or no? Increasingly, that doesn't seem to be true. And I think that may be the issue, that bringing in something like mandatory reporting would increase the number of allegations and investigations which were needed. And my personal view is that we just don't have, or the politicians don't think we have the finances to do that. It's money. Now, answering your question, again, money means lots of things are done for different reasons. And sadly, money runs this world. My view is that not dealing with abuse allegations immediately is false economy. If you dealt with abuse allegations immediately, those survivors, number one, would be less survivors, but number two, giving therapy to a 15-year-old is much better than treating someone when they're 45 with no treatment, because obviously it's so much extensive. Instead of giving 6 sessions, 12, 20 sessions of CBT or some other form of therapy, you have to give a lot more, much longer course. But it's not just you. Your children may also need therapy, family counselling. Your partner may need it, couples therapy. You are more likely to contribute to society, better paid jobs, more stable employment. Abuse survivors have an increased level of unemployment, so they're a bigger financial burden on the state. You're relying on state benefits inherently. Drink and drug abuse means there may also be other issues, not just psychological, but also potentially physical health, which again requires treatment. They may have self-harm, they may have attempted suicide, again, involves medical treatment. So I think it's an argument which is flawed, saying that we don't have the finances. The fact is, we can't afford to continue to ignore abuse survivors and failing to investigate. That's the simple truth on a moral level and on a financial level. And we need to address this. We can't just hope that 10 people suffer abuse. Hopefully some of them won't report, therefore it won't cost us. We need to do more. And I think that removing that kind of theory that potentially politicians are involved in this, just looking at it from a purely simplistic point of view, men abuse, sadly. Men abuse. And especially those in positions of power, they abuse even more. That's the issue. And the finances is a red herring. We can't afford to ignore this any longer.
Get lost in the weeds there. I want to give a little bit of pushback, especially when you look at, let's say, the Prince Andrew situation, right?
Yeah.
There is more than just concern with Virginia. I forget her last name. Dufresne, yeah, something like that. When you look at that, pictures of the fella with the young girl, and you look at his connections to the people he was associated with, you look at the fact that we still don't have the little black book. You look at the fact that Charles was best mates with Jimmy Savile, and you look at the history that he had. And again, I come back to, there's no way these people could have pulled the wool over the eyes of the best intelligence services the world has got, who have access to technologies that you and I can both only dream of. There's just no way. So for me, that must be an element whereby there is a certain amount of this that is almost allowed to go on by those that are involved, by those that are, again, men in positions of power, for whatever reason that might be. Some of those reasons we explored briefly on the previous podcast that I did. But I have to say that there must be a political edge to this, because it's also rife for manipulation and blackmail as well. Something like this.
Yeah, but the thing is, politically, it doesn't matter if you're Tory, Lib Dem, Labour, left or right-leaning. The fact is, men in positions of power do abuse that and do sexually assault people. So it's not a political thing. And I think that you look at the number of people who suffer abuse, the people who you've mentioned in those connections, is such a small percentage of the total picture. So I don't think that there's a system in support of them, to be frank. I think it is complacency. And I think it is this position whereby people do just inherently trust. Most people are really good, honest people, and we do trust until we see something which can't be true. It is, you're clearly wrong. And even then, it's that self-doubt going, is that right? Do I trust myself? I think that is the case. And it may be me being simplistic and believing, but I think that is right. And I think when we look at all of these issues, and IICSA spent a lot of money to investigate certain MPs. Lord Janner Lord Smith and the others like that, Cyril Smith and Jana. The fact is, the number of people they could abuse and the number of people they did abuse was such a, and again, every abuse survivor matters, and I have to stress that. But it's looking at those whereby children come into most contact with, which is parents and uncles and friends and neighbors and teachers and like, there is no conspiracy theory. It is often missed opportunities, complacency, not picking up on the signals, and that's how abuse can take place. Picking up on things like Prince Andrew. There's so many questions which we may never know the answers to. Same as Epstein and others. If you're going to write a story about someone like Epstein or did a movie about it, it sounds totally implausible. And I don't disagree with you. How could this happen? How could this be allowed? If me or you had to go on a plane where, you ask about 20 questions, people go through your suitcases, you go through about 5 different, electric checks and stuff. And then you're saying, well, hold on, did no one pick up on, young children going on flights by themselves, etc.? I hear you and I get it. But at the same time, I think for lots of the politicians and the like, it is just the same as other areas of society, often, to be frank. Often their power does mean that more people feel unable to raise concerns. And this is the thing. If you have Joe Bloggs, who's a homeless person, people are more likely to report him. If you have someone who's your father, it's difficult. There's more barriers. Uncles, sisters, mum may not raise concerns. Teachers, again, you can see how that kind of circle of trust widens and widens. And also your repercussions, if you're wrong, the repercussions against you increase. The more high profile, the bigger they are, the harder they will fall, or the harder it is to make them fall. And that may be an issue, especially with the VIP people, such as Jimmy Savile. He was so high profile, he was so powerful. And like you said, he was able to penetrate different areas of society. It wasn't just TV, it wasn't just MPs and other connections or hospitals. He was able to do that and to gain all that trust and manipulate everyone. And as a result, where was then the point for truth to come out? It was so hard. And then for that survivor, it was impossible because no one's listening. And even if they did, they weren't going to act on it because they just couldn't
fathom it. No.
Yeah.
And then I want to get onto the sentencing and whether or not prison reform is working in this area. But there's also something to be said about the percentage of people that are abused that then go on to repeat the abuse, right? That's also part of this. For those who don't get treatment, don't get therapy, they then go on to reproduce the similar things that happen to themselves.
Let's deal with those two separate ends. So in relation to prison, the question is, what is prison? What's the point of it? And there's 3 bases. One is it for rehabilitation? Is it for a deterrent to deter other people from committing the same crimes? Or is it for a punishment? And I think over time, those things have varied, and it's varied for different offences. If you're convicted for drug offences, prison may be rehabilitation for you, to be frank. If you're convicted for fraud, it may be a deterrent for others for fraud. But for sexual abuse, predominantly, it can only be as a punishment. You know that if you commit child abuse, you will go to prison in all likelihood. So it can't be a deterrent. Rehabilitation, is it possible? It's a perennial issue because the fact is it's so difficult. And if you mess it up, a child gets abused. It's not like you're falling off the bandwagon. You've
Alcoholics Anonymous kind of. Yeah, you've had another drink. We start again tomorrow.
Yeah. It's not that, and the repercussions are so severe. So it's a really difficult one. So it should be a punishment, and it should punish someone for committing these offences. Now, is it a continued punishment? Well, we know that it will never compensate those individuals. You can't impact the hands of time. You suffering pain for what you did to me, it isn't eye for an eye. It's nothing like that, because actually you're going to prison when you're in your 50s, 60s. Because of course, suffered abuse when you were 10, didn't disclose for 30 years. If I'm 40, you must be 60, 70, 80. So your life, you've had a really good life. Well done to you. You've had your entire life. Now you've got to go to prison, but not for a full sentence. You get sentenced to 10 years. You'd be out in 5 in all likelihood, because you haven't committed any other offences during your time in prison. it isn't sufficient. It isn't proper punishment, and we do need to look at that severely. Your second point about do abuse survivors then go on to abuse? That is largely a myth. It has been so many things done on this. Actually, those people who suffer abuse often fear that they may be abusers or people perceive them to be abusers. Lots of my clients have never bathed their children, find it difficult to show emotion, difficult to go to changing rooms with them because they're worried about people perceiving it. They're extremely overcautious around them and very protective of them. Some of my clients have chosen to have vasectomies in their 20s because they can't ever face people judging them or accusing them of potentially abusing their children because they have this fear. But it is a myth to a large extent. That doesn't mean that some abuse survivors do then go on to abuse. But the studies show that the proportion of those compared to the general population is less actually in the general population because often they're more cautious and they are concerned. And it is largely a myth. It's one of these things which is a myth, to be frank, to a very large extent.
Okay, interesting. That's also very sad to hear that they would forego that. I'm a young father myself, and it's a wonderful process. And
yeah,
to think that
triggering though, Sonny. It's triggering though, because the thing is, let's say you have a son and you were abused in a boarding school. Do you send your child to a boarding school? Because everyone thinks you should be, because you went to a boarding school, you have the money to, and according to your class system, you should, but you said no. Why? How do you justify that? Or your children usually look like you, either you or your partner, obviously. So you have a son who looks like you. They become 10. You suffered abuse when you're 10. Triggers there, issues there. You can't have overnight stays. You cannot take part in football. You cannot go to the changing room. You know, it's so constrictive, and you can't tell your child if you don't want them to think less of you as a man. It can be really triggering, actually, to be frank, especially with same-sex children. So if you're a male and you have a male child and they look like you, especially, you can see yourself because obviously they look like you. It is so hard. And you do eventually cut off certain parts of their lives to protect them, but actually what you're doing is causing harm to them. You can't keep them in a bubble. They got to go out into normal society, but they can't. You just can't
fathom it.
You can't take the risk.
Coming back to the prison side of it then.
Yeah.
So reform for these kinds of things, what's the recidivism rate?
Yeah, it's really hard, to be frank. And there's been different forms of rehabilitation in different countries all over the globe, to be frank. Some successful, some not. The rates aren't particularly good. And what often it means is that we will give you rehabilitation, but when you come out into society, you cannot be within a certain amount of children. You cannot be by schools. You cannot work around children. You have to disclose everything. So it's so hard because it's not a proper life, to be frank. So there's no proper rates on it, with total respect. It just doesn't work. It's a bit like if you're an alcoholic and you say, right, you're going to be in an island. There is no pub. There's no alcohol. Oh, great. You're no longer an alcoholic. That's amazing. What they will do is they find other methods. So if they committed physical acts, often the first acts, if they do commit again, is inappropriate images and videos and the like, because that's the way they do get access sometimes. It is such a difficult thing to do, and often it comes down to trust. People don't trust you. People want to know where you live. Is a real impact. And again, I have limited sympathy, and that's true for child abusers, but at the same time, what do we do with them, to be totally frank? You can't imprison them for life because of capacity.
Why not?
Well, I knew you were going to say. I shouldn't have said it. I was like, I knew you were going to say that.
Yeah. Why not? It's a simple question. I know listeners are going to think that straight away. Why can't we? If the impact that they've had on someone,
I know,
their life, and I'm not an absolutist in virtually every other aspect of my life, but with this one, I'm like, do you know what?
Yeah,
I don't mind the death penalty. I don't mind
so I disagree
castration.
With the death penalty.
I don't mind
castration doesn't work, by the way. There were studies done in Sweden, and it didn't work. They still went on to sexually abuse, because you'd think it's
dull the urges and
Yeah, which I was really surprised. So I'm not, I've never campaigned or
No,
advocated
no.
for it, but at the same time, someone did the study and it didn't work. You're like, well, how? Because it's not. This is the thing. Sexual abuse isn't about physical. It's mental. It is a need. And this is the thing which we have. So should they face lifetimes in prison? Different offences, different times. The reason why there's a tariff system, to be totally frank, is because of capacity. If we imprisoned every single person who committed a crime, I'm not saying the entire country would be in prison, but they would do this again. It's a numbers thing, which is really sad. And again, I'm not a politician, so it's a really rubbish answer to be made, to be frank. The fact is, we should have punishments which are proportionate to the crimes committed. And you mentioned it, for nearly all my clients. The fact is, first time you've been touched by an abuser, your life changes. That's it. And it distorts lots of your memories. Your memory of beaches or football clubs or ice cream often can be tainted. So my clients have triggers for songs and foods and smells, which be within the rest of their lives. One of them has triggers for potatoes. Another one has with aftershave, some with the sea and water. They can't be by a swim bath. They can't go in the bath. They can't go to the beach. Bit of an issue. We've got a child because they like
That's
swimming.
what they want to do. Yeah.
So you just don't do it. You leave it to your partner to do. So because it's triggering, it reminds you of the abuse. You've been abused by a swimming teacher. So the fact is that the criminal justice system, I'm not saying it's a token gesture. I'm not saying that at all. But it can never, to be totally frank, punish someone to the same. It's not an eye for an eye. It's just not. It's a punishment of sorts. And getting a 24 or 32-year prison sentence obviously is a serious prison sentence. It's a huge chunk of your life which has been taken away from you. You've lost that independence. But it's not the same as suffering sexual abuse. Lots of my clients would say, I much prefer to go to prison for 16 years and to suffer what I've suffered and continue to suffer until I die. I'm not a full human being. I haven't reached my potential. I'm not a full father, full husband. I'm not, because of what he did to me. Compare that to someone going to prison for 16, 20 years when they're 60 or 70, they would say, I would swap that in a heartbeat. I had a full life as a full human being. I could see my potential. I haven't been hindered or handicapped by these issues and by the abuse. They would definitely swap with that person and go to prison. They would, to be frank. So it's an issue which needs further debate, to be frank. I don't believe in the death penalty for numerous reasons. The prison sentencing often isn't. We had a case recently, the case of Paul Dard, a school teacher abused at Whitgift School, abused 3 boys, received a suspended sentence for sexually abusing him. We challenged that. He received a 4-year prison sentence instead. And since then, a number of people have come forward for abuse at that school and other schools he taught at. But again, the question is 4 years sufficient? I definitely knew suspended sentence wasn't. And also, I can only apply what the law is. We should get increased sentencing for these offences. The politicians will say, we haven't got the capacity. It costs too much to imprison them. But the concern is we can't rehabilitate them. So what do? You just throw them out in society and hope for the best. It's a genuine concern. What do you do with child abusers for the rest of their lives?
There's a case recently of I believe it was in the UK. I was speaking to someone about this earlier when I mentioned I was going to be talking to you, of a woman who shot her child's abuser. She killed the child's abuser, and she was given, I want to say, 2 years or something like that. And a bunch of, I could be getting this wrong because, like I say, I haven't looked into this yet. It was a conversation I had this morning. Child abusers came together and said, listen, if you guys don't increase the sentence, what we're going to get is vigilante justice on the street. And that's also something that you don't want. And then her sentence was increased as a result of the letter. Am I getting this right? Or are some of my facts a bit?
I'm not really sure about all of it. The thing is with the law is often it is black and white. And something like you just explained, you've done a bad act, killed someone for a reason. The fact is when you look at the law, mitigating circumstance, such as, that's the reason why I did it for. the law can be very harsh, often actually, and sometimes on the wrong people. Circumstantial. If you're homeless and you steal food, you mitigate circumstance. I'm not doing it to get any financial gain. I need food. But you still committed an offence. You've got to be punished for it. I dealt with, at the very start of my career, there was a homeless man who nicked a number of pairs of socks from Marks and Spencer's. Cost something like 30 quid for 4 sets of socks. Expensive socks. But he needed them for his feet. He wasn't doing it, because he has no money. He was destitute. And they did a financial payment order against him. He had to pay back 2 quid a week for something stupid, like, agent. He had no money. How is he going to pay back 2 quid a week? I'll never know. But that's what the law was. And then he didn't pay back 2 quid a week, and then they punished him further. If he hadn't paid it back, he breached the court order. He's just like, sometimes we just create problems for ourselves, And I think
roundabouts.
Yeah, exactly. And I think similar for that, what she did, you should never murder anyone. I don't believe in that. But the reason why she did is she didn't feel that the criminal justice system would protect her children, and she didn't feel that the abuser was being punished sufficiently. So she took the law into her own hands. But dealing with the first 2 points, can we protect abuse survivors? Can we protect society from abusers? Can we punish abusers appropriately? A question is probably for another session with you, to be frank, because it's such a big issue. Look into
great.
that. But yeah, it's just not good enough, to be frank, at the moment.
I have a final question, something that I'm not too well read into, but again, the chap that I had on last, Craig, mentioned this as well. It goes on to what you said of the act of child abuse not being a sexual one. It's a mental one. There's something up there that's happened. One of the things that Craig mentioned in the work that they do in their charity is when they've interviewed abusers after the fact, they found a lot of them got there from pornography that progressively got more abusive and different, let's say, as it went. And then they slowly but surely ended up where they ended up on the child abuse end of the spectrum. Is there something in that? Is there that you've come across with the victims that you've worked with and their perpetrators?
Yeah, it's a hard one because there is no real link to sexuality or pornography or the like, just because there's different abusers in different eras. So pornography in the 1960s is very different to 2000s and the 2020s. Abuse is still happening throughout the entire period. The accessibility of pornography as well is very different. Buying it from a magazine in 1960, a video in 2000, digital, the internet 2020, for example, it's very different. And sometimes there's time, we have a case at the moment where a father has abused not his daughter but his granddaughter. So he never abused his daughter. So just and that's sometimes when you're looking and you're representing survivors, you try to get some logic from it. So man murdered wife because they were having a fight and it escalated significantly. Totally wrong, but logically you can see how that escalation can take place.
You can follow the steps.
You follow steps. But if you're attracted to children, if you're sexually attracted to children, surely you would always be sexually attracted to children. It isn't you just go, well, actually now I feel confident doing this. So that doesn't make sense. And I think the kind of escalation of it, it is strange. There's been most abusers, to be frank, from the 30s onwards, and then it's a continuation until they are caught or stopped, to be frank. Apart from that case, and there's a couple of other cases whereby they didn't abuse anyone at all, as far as we're aware, until they're in their mid-50s, early 60s, and decided, now I want to sexually abuse a child. It's a concern. I think that exposure to harmful material is obviously harmful in the title, but lots of people watch pornography and are not child abusers. Again, the proportion is that. Same as this thing in America, computer games result in people shooting people. Lots of people watch them. They don't go on and murder people. And I think often it's an excuse. I don't think it's the reason. And I think that same as when people say I suffered abuse and therefore I abuse, you're looking for an excuse. You made that conscious decision. You know how bad that was for you. Surely you want your children to have a better life. and you don't want to abuse other children. Surely you want that. We all want that as parents. And I think that the key thing for abusers is to understand a lot more. And the one thing which I'm very keen to do is not to label them as monsters at all. Because the fact is, monsters operate in the dark and in the beds and in shadows. Monsters, when we're talking about child abusers are me and you and the normal people. That's the real fear. It's not the weirdos wearing an anorak in the park with sweets. It's not. It's that lovely football coach. It's your mate. It's your father. It's normal, lovely people who do really horrendous things. The question is, how were they able to do it? Why do they do it? And then what do we do with them when we get them? The punishment. That kind of journey is something which has never been addressed, to be frank, fully or satisfactory for survivors or society. And in 2023, we're still facing the same issues as we have done since the day of dawn. It's not working. And one thing which we do encourage people to do, and we do much better at, is exposing abuse and encouraging survivors to talk. And I think that's really important. But like I said at the very outset, we're really good at that now. Media coverage is much better in exposing abuse. That's just the start. The how and the why we need to address. Similar as we do for serial murderers, why are you a serial murderer? How did you get there? How do we stop it? What was going on? We need to do a lot more of that with child abusers to try to prevent it, but not just them, but also everyone else in society, family, friends, work colleagues. How did you also not know this? Fair enough, an innocent child who doesn't know, the world is round, for example, at the age of 8. How do you not know this as an adult? How did you not pick up on it? What stopped you from acting and realizing this man was an abuser? We need to work on that so much more to stop child abuse in this country and across the world, to be frank.
Absolutely. Well, I know we're pressed for time and you have other meetings to get to as well. I really, really appreciate you being able to spend some time with us and have a chat on this topic. It's been a difficult conversation. I have a lot of respect for the work that you do and being able to continue on with your fight. So thank you. I suppose last bit, how can people find out more about what it is that you're doing and the things that you're working on?
Yeah, so I'm on Twitter, which I think is now called X, as far as I'm aware. See what it is next week, I suppose. But no, I'm on Twitter, I'm on LinkedIn, got a Facebook profile. I'm always open for people to discuss things. I do talks for free for charities and lawyers and other people. There's lots of campaigns, but I do try to publicize stuff. So, do lots of articles, lots of campaigns. We do publicize it on social media. And again, if anyone's got any questions, I'm sure you're, able to pass on my details, email, direct dial, social media contacts. But yeah, it's good to talk. And I really appreciate you speaking to me and listening to me as well. It's really appreciated. Thank you.